Morning, everybody. I'm sorry I'm a little bit late for the planned Facebook Live, and it suits the topic, my tardiness. So the topic for today is how to get over, not get over, but braving. So in other words, getting past the fears of vulnerability. And over the years, we've developed a really cool model that basically talks to this whole thing about how do you do it and what does it really mean? Because I think before Brené Brown came onto the scene, vulnerability had a really bad rap. Vulnerability means you're being weak, you're being pathetic, you are exposed to the sense that you are going to be taken advantage of and things like that. And then Brené Brown came up and she came up with these amazing things about, and I really like the idea that she's put together. So I want to talk about that and our adaptation of the whole thinking about how do you protect yourself and how do you stay into that space where you are being brave to be vulnerable. And the other topic that we touched on a lot recently was the whole ego story, and I want to show how the two things work together, because the reality is we grew up thinking that it's a bad thing to be, especially the older generations and especially the men grew up to think being vulnerable is terrible, because if you think about war situations and things like that, vulnerability has got a really, really bad rap, and it means that you are going to get killed. So these boys that are now middle-aged men and leaders of our businesses, they grew up in an environment where they had to protect themselves, and they had this whole idea of barbed wire around them and this massive shell so that you can't get through to them and you can't really see who they are. Thank goodness the new generations, the millennials, the Generation Z, they're a lot better with this, in my opinion, because what they have figured out is that even though it's hard to be vulnerable, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, and it makes things so much better. So I want to show you just what we usually do in our workshops and the work that we do around vulnerability and around ego and how to just position it. And the question that I want you, while I'm talking through it, that I want you just to hold is, when do you feel vulnerable? And what we do is we usually say to people, finish the sentence, I feel vulnerable when. And you can position it in terms of your workplace, but also in terms of your personal life. So when do you feel vulnerable? And because it's different for everybody. One of the things that I do know, however, is, and I learned this from a friend of mine's mom, we all sort of started having babies at the same time. And she made a comment and said, the moment you know you're pregnant, you're vulnerable, because you know that that you have a baby and that you're responsible, and there's a responsibility around it. So being a parent makes you incredibly vulnerable, and I know this for a fact, because like this morning I've got a child that's got an earache and didn't sleep much, and it's got a knock-on effect. It's got a knock-on effect on my life, and it makes me feel like, ooh, I'm out of control, and I feel vulnerable when I'm out of control. So, which is all the time. So if I may just quickly go through this with you. So I hope you guys can see this properly. So it says ego, vulnerability, and self. So there's a whole concept is that for the true self to really be seen and to be able to see others, you have to get through a space where you allow other people to see you, where you get rid of that shell, or you go through that shell and you say, I'm not going to be stepping into my ego now. And ego, like we said before, is anything that you feel have protected you. So it's an exaggerated self-confidence. So self-confidence for me is like on the brim of going into the ego. And like we said before, self-confidence is learned behavior. Self-confidence is knowledge and experience. So if you've got those two things, you can be confident in something. But the moment you think you are and your identity is in that skill set or in that role, you move into the ego. And being vulnerable means you're saying, I'm okay with myself, and I am willing to admit shortcomings. I'm willing to say no. I'm willing to ask for what I need. I'm willing to say I don't have all the answers. And the reason why vulnerability is such an important topic and such an important theme to discuss and to talk about and to use the words of Brené Brown, it's the birthplace of innovation and creativity. And this is where it happens. So if you think about this, there's no way you and I can come up with a beautiful solution if we don't both go in and saying, oh, I don't know, let's just try to figure it out together. And that is what it's about. So trying to move through that incredible space of might not be good enough, that is the risk. So, and that is what people do. They put themselves out there to say, I don't know if I'm going to be good enough, and I'm scared that you're going to see who I truly am, and then will I be good enough? And that's why we struggle with it. So for today, I think what I wanted to say to you is, first of all, be brave, jump in and just do it. And vulnerability is like, in my view, it's like a muscle. You get better and better at it. And you learn who you can be more vulnerable with. And people need to, people need to deserve your vulnerability. So if you've got an arsehole boss, pardon my French, or if you've got somebody that's really mean to you, you don't have to be vulnerable with that person. You can protect yourself. You do not have to step out there and be completely naked in a way. So, and you can set proper boundaries to protect you. There's nothing wrong with that. But no relationship will grow if you stay in that ego space and you stay in that superficial space. You have to go deeper. You have to go into a space of saying, I don't know and you don't know, and we've got to try to figure something out together. And I hope this has been helpful. I know this is, for many, many, many people, a very uncomfortable topic, but I believe it's the only way that we're going to be able to build proper relationships, build proper families and organizations. I've been very privileged to work with quite a few CEOs and MDs that are able to actually say to their exco and their management teams, okay guys, I don't know what the answer is here, can you help? And that is exactly what we're looking for. That has been helpful, and thank you so much for showing up. Bye-bye.